All right, hi everybody. It's good to see everybody. I am here, Sheila. I have been a martial artist for about 18 years in the art of Chang Hung Taekwondo, and I am a third-degree black belt. I own my own martial arts school called Iron Fan Martial Arts and Empowerment. I absolutely love doing martial arts, and martial arts in a lot of ways overlaps with self-defense, in a lot of ways is really different than self-defense. And so one of the reasons why this seminar came up was that I had a lot of people who are now coming into ESD Global who are not martial artists. And that used to be the primary way that people became self-defense experts and teachers, is through the martial arts. And now we're finding we've got all kinds of other people coming in, which is fantastic because we all know that the physical skills are only a tiny part of what we teach at ESD. So I've had hearing some people that they are feeling that maybe their physical skills, if they're not martial artists, are degrading after they've done their level 1, or they're not feeling comfortable in teaching them. So I'm here to give you a little refresher. So if y'all are a martial artist, or if you've been doing this for a really long time, this will probably not be that interesting to you. But if you need to be more comfortable with the physical aspects of what you're teaching, that's what I'm here for. So today we're going to do stance and striking. And we're going to do the bread and butter techniques that we all use for our typical short courses, or from our introductory courses. We're not going to get into anything fancy unless we have time. If we have time, that's great. So a couple things I want to remind people who are feeling that their physical skills are degrading. They aren't. Why? Because the techniques that we choose to use are really simple techniques. So your physical techniques are, I'm sure, very, very good. What does degrade, maybe for some of you, is your ability to teach them, and the way that you use language, the way that you do your demonstrations. And sometimes that can be good to have a little refresher for that. So that when your students are asking questions, you feel competent enough to answer those questions, and you feel like you have the right language to be able to do it. So it's really kind of the instruction that I want to focus on as well today, to make sure that you can feel competent and comfortable with doing that. So I really like you guys to ask questions. I'm not doing this for me, I'm doing this for you guys. So I want to know what you feel like you need. What are you looking for? What isn't working for you? What makes you nervous? What questions come up from your students all the time that you're not sure how to answer? And hopefully we'll get through things that way. Does anybody have any questions or any comments right off the bat that before I get into it? All right, we'll go from here. So first thing, stance. Martial arts, stance, all kinds of different stances that we have in martial arts, right? So we've got boxing, we've got WTF Taekwondo, we've got all different kinds of styles of ready stance, right? So the ready stances all have different purposes in martial arts. In ESD, it's very, very different. So we want to make sure that we're using a stance that's right for ESD. So if you guys, I can't see most of you, I don't know if cameras are on, whatever, feel free to get up and move with me. I'm going to ask you to do a couple things if you're game for that. So we're talking about stance, right? When we do a stance, we want to do a nice shoulder width apart. Why shoulder width apart? Too narrow, you don't have as good balance. A little bit further apart gives you a little bit more balance. It also helps with your posture. And your posture, because we don't normally stand like this, we want to think of ourselves that way when we're doing empowerment self-defense, right? We want to be able to think of ourselves as somebody strong. And so sometimes having your feet a little bit further apart is good for that. You always want to have one foot in front or behind the other, depending on whether you're left-handed or right-handed. You'll find the one that feels comfortable. Sometimes people will ask, is there a right way or a wrong way to do it? Which foot should be forward, which foot should be back? No, doesn't matter. Do whatever's comfortable for you. Why do we want to have one foot forward, one foot back? Because this is a really unbalanced situation, especially if someone pushes you from the front. How common is a two-handed or even a one-handed push in self-defense situations? Really, really, really common. So having one foot back helps with that balance. Now you're a little bit more stable. We don't want to be too far down, right? So if you're too far down, you're really stable. Really hard to push me over right now. I have somebody really heavy come and try and push me over, and it'd be really hard to do. But your mobility is limited. So now you have no mobility, right? You want to also be able to be mobile. So you don't want to go down too far. The other thing you don't want to do in terms of balance is have your feet too close together or in a line. Then you have no balance from the side, right? It's really tippy and wobbly. Next question that comes up is, should we move forward into our stance or should we move backwards into our stance? And I'm going to say that's situational. There are situations where you're going to want to move forward and you're going to own your space. And there are times where you're going to say, I'm not a threat. Depends on the situation. It also might depend on your comfort level, right? Some people might feel very comfortable coming forward. Some people might feel a little more comfortable going backwards. Either way, that is just fine. One thing about stepping backwards that you can tell your students if they're interested is if you're stepping backwards, your students are much, much, much more likely to go into this kind of situation, right? Why? Because we don't have eyes in the back of our head, and human beings do not like to step back without looking. So we tend to do this in anticipation of a turn, right? So if your students are stepping back, make sure they check that they haven't lost any width in their stance. Does all that make sense? So far, so good? I'm assuming yes. Hands. Remember, the purpose of the stance is not, in self-defense, is not to protect against physical techniques, physical attacks as its primary thing. The primary thing in self-defense is to give us that psychological energy that we need, give us our space, do our universal, this is my space, stop, right? And give us the opportunity to use all of our other techniques, our verbal strategies, our emotional strategies, and all of those before we have to use our physical ones, right? So we want to make sure that when we do this, we are psychologically prepared, hands are up, ready if we need to use them for physical things, but also to make sure that we've got the space that we need to use all of our other skills, right? So there's our basic stance, right? So usually when I'm practicing this with students, I'll have them just shake out, walk around a little bit. You're here, back into your stance, forward into your stance. Sometimes we teach this as well. That's an extra, right? Which this is a, I'm not sure what's happening stance, right? And I'm ready to go if I need to, really fast, but I don't want to look like I'm prepared for that yet because I'm not sure if this is a bad situation or not. And so we've got kind of an in-between stance or a kind of reactionary stance. All right, basic stance stuff. Movement in stance. I've got notes in case anyone's wondering, so I don't forget something, because I typically will, because I get nervous when I have to talk like this in front of so many of you guys. So other thing about stance is your weight distribution should be 50-50. Why do we do 50-50 weight distribution? Because that helps with our mobility, right? So if I'm standing with all my weight on one foot, it's really easy to move this foot, really hard to move forward, right? Because I've got no weight there. So we want to have that nice balance there. And we want to be able to move, right? So the beauty, I'm going to switch stance because this is my preferred southpaw stance. We want to be able to move forward, move backwards, move to the side, move to the other side, right? We'll have our hands up like this, right? Here, slide forward, right? Step forward, step backwards, step backwards. All of these things can be done from a really nice basic stance. All right, anybody have any questions? I've got one more thing having to do with stance, and then we're going to move into calm heel straight. Does anybody have any questions while we're here? No, everyone's good? All right, I'm going to take a quick sip of tea. Carrie, do you have a question?
Yes. Do you, in ESD classes, do you teach anything about the angle of your feet, or do you just leave that alone?
Nope, and that's actually where I'm going next. That's exactly
okay.
where I'm going next. Yeah. So no, good question then, right? A lot of people don't think about it. So in my martial art, we have what's called full facing, half facing, and side facing. So obviously this is side facing, this is full facing, this is half facing, right? So the techniques that we're using, or at least that I'm teaching today, are all straight line techniques, right? So we're going to do a palm heel, we're going to do a knee, and we're going to, if we have time, do an elbow. Those are the strikes that are kind of the bread and butter that we use all the time. And if for a straight line technique, you want to have a straight line. You don't want to have to reorient your body. So if I'm going to be in a bladed position, is another terminology for this, it's really good for martial arts, limits where you can be hit for points and all that sort of thing. But if I am trying to hit somebody who's over there and say my knee or my hand is back here, I have all of this shifting that has to happen, all of this rotation that has to happen. And for a straight line technique, it's much more efficient, much faster, much more powerful. If you're here, you can just move straight on with the technique, right? So instead of me having to reorient my knee, because this is where my knee would naturally go, right? I'm standing here this direction, bladed to my opponent over here, my knee's over here. To get my knee all the way over there takes a lot of energy. If my hips are square, straight line to my technique, right? Fast and easy, straight line right to my technique. So for the purpose of the strikes that we use, straight line techniques, straight line techniques, straight line technique, you're going to have your hips square to your opponent, right? You develop more power that way. That is not true for every strike, and it's certainly not true for martial arts. For a lot of them, they're rotational, right? They come in from the side, and that's a totally different animal. But for the straight line strikes that we're doing, hips square. That answer your question? Is that what you wanted, Carrie? Perfect. All right. Anybody else have any questions or thoughts? All right. So, basic first first technique, palm heel strike. Why do we use a palm heel strike, right? Palm heel is not the flat of your hand. It's not a slap. Sometimes in ESD, we call it a slap. I don't like that terminology, and I try never ever to use that language because people misinterpret what a slap means, right? My friend, my buddy here, slap, right? That is a strike. And I don't know how much you can hear that. Even if I go really fast and hard, I'm not hitting that hard, whereas that's giving me power, right? I have another example of the slap versus the palm heel, right? So the palm heel is only touching, hitting with that section right there of the base of your palm. Think of it this way. I'm going to slap you, right? Imagine me slapping you with this. Is it going to hurt? Of course it's going to hurt. It's metal. It's a pot lid, right? Now I'm going to hit you with this. Not really. I'm not really trying to be violent. I'm trying to just show you something, right? If I'm going to hit you with a hammer, right, that's going to be a lot more damaging. And the reason is concentration of force, right? So instead of spreading off the force through your entire palm, you're concentrating the force into a smaller area, and that's going to cause more injury and give you the time you need to get away, which is what the whole point is. So yeah, so I don't like to call it a slap. I don't like to teach it as a slap. We've got to make sure that it's not. Why else do we do palms? Palm heels, as opposed to other techniques, it's really hard to hurt yourself doing a palm heel. Hard to break bones. It's a good, solid, stable tool that we have that we can use. Other reasons. We can then use our fingers to do different things, right? So if we hit somebody in the face, we can scratch, we can eye gouge, we can grab hair, we can manipulate the person's head possibly, right? So these are all really good reasons why we would use a palm heel. So targets for the palm heel: nose, chin are the primary ones. Person's behind you. This is where we call it a slap sometimes, but it's still palm heel strike. To the groin, add a grab if you want. Always like to do that. So hands, oh, and the other reason is because our hands are already here. We're already in this position. So when we're here, why think about having to do something else with our fingers? We're already here. All you have to do is shoot it out. That's just efficiency, right? So if we're going to demonstrate a palm heel strike, we're going to start in our stance, right? You can hit with the front hand, you can hit with the back hand. You're going to get more power with the back hand almost universally, right? But you can hit with both, right? You can do 1, 2. I often teach that. You can do just backhand and repeat over and over again, right? Either way is fine. And then, like I said, you can add grabs or gouges or that kind of thing if you want as well. So from here, we're going to be back into our stance, and we're going to move into the palm heel strike, striking here, right? So what it'll look like, right, is that or that. Taking a quick break. I need to have the tea to keep talking. You can also do 2, right? Palm heels has a slight upward trajectory, especially when you're doing 2, which is great because you're going up underneath the nose and underneath the chin, right? Notice that I'm using my whole body when I do these techniques, right? So I'm not just straightening my elbow, my whole body goes with it. This is giving you torque, right? Which adds power to your technique. Heel, sometimes they raise off the ground, sometimes they don't. In Taekwondo, we're taught to keep them on the ground because that helps bring the power from the ground all the way through your legs, through your hips, and through your strike. If the heel raises in a self-defense situation, it's fine. It's okay, right? The other thing about these techniques is that they don't have to be perfect. You don't have to do perfect technique every time in order to make them work. So one of the reasons why we teach these specific techniques, they're easy to remember and they don't have to be perfect in order to be effective, right? Twin attack, straight line. Oh, the other thing that happens. So common mistakes that happen with your students with this kind of technique. One is, especially with the front hand technique, but it can happen here too, is that they're leaning forward, right? So we're here, and then they're leaning forward and that takes them off balance. So you want to try to remind them not to reach for their target. The reason why they're having and struggling with that is because they haven't figured out distancing yet, right? So you want to teach them how far they need to be from their target if they're struggling with something like that, right? For best efficiency, the height of power when you're doing a technique in a straight line is at the 80% of full extension. So that should be your contact point, right? So some students will, when they want to hit something, will do this as their distancing, right? So see my elbow is at full extension, where my palm is hitting the nose or hitting the chin, right? What we want to do is teach them that the point of contact should be about 80%, right? So this is full extension, right? And my target is going to get hit at 80% of that full extension, and that's going to give the most power. So that's what we want to do. So if you've got students who, when they go to hit, are leaning forward, then they're too far back. So you have to adjust for that and let them know that that is the issue. Other common mistakes, So other common mistakes is people doing push. Really common with the twin palm is it'll turn into a push rather than a strike. And sometimes that happens when you're too close to the target, So if somebody is really confident and they're too close to the target, you can't get a good strike in, right? You need the extension to be able to do that. And it's hard to use your body when you're this close, right? So distancing is a really important concept for teaching your students. Sometimes you don't need to give them all the details for this sort of thing. It's useful for you to know them so you understand. Like, they don't need the 80% rule. That's a really important thing for you guys to know, because it gives you a feeling that you understand the concepts, right? They may not need to know the 80% rule, but you need to know what's happening with them if their strikes are not being effective. So if they're practicing on somebody like this, or if they're practicing on focus pads and they're not getting an effective strike in, you need to be able to go in there and go, oh, let's measure you up. Oh, you're too close. Oh, you're too far, right? And then you'll be able to help them to deliver more effective strikes. Make sense? Yes? Okay. I am going to say I'm finding this very difficult without getting feedback. Normally when I teach, I'm in the room with everybody and I can see and talk and I ask questions, make sense, you know, and I can see people nodding. So just so you guys know, this is a real struggle for me. This is the first time that I've really taught something without getting that feedback. So this is tough. I'm just letting you know that. Understanding.
Yeah, Sheila, everyone is saying that you're doing great. And if you have any questions, we can unmute you. So feel free to let us know. Okay.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, Carrie has another question, so I'm just gonna unmute her.
This is really challenging. This is tough. So yeah, I really love the interactivity. So if anybody does have any questions,
Yeah.
I'd really love to hear it. I know that some of you guys are martial artists that are watching this too, and I know you guys all, where martial artists are famous for disagreeing with each other and having different ideas. And all of our martial arts do different things, and they have different purposes. So we're, like I said, we're famous for that. We love to do it. But remember, the point of this is for our students and for our new instructors who have done their level 1s. And we can talk what's good and what's not so good about other martial arts with each other privately if you want. So does anybody have any other questions about the palm heel strike in particular?
Yes, so Carrie, you are unmuted. You can go ahead with your question, please.
Okay. I'm wondering about the safety of students when they, regardless of how close they are, if they do the strike with a locked arm, and I'm wondering if you teach it with the bend so that there's not a joint injury.
Right, so we don't want to hyperextend our elbows. That has never happened to me ever in a class. I will only address it specifically, me personally, I will only address it specifically if I see somebody doing it. But when I teach it, you want full extension. The language that I use is you want full extension without locking it out. And that's typically the language that I use when I'm teaching this, right? So I don't specifically say do it with keep your elbow bent. I don't think you can get full power if you have your elbow bent. You end up getting jammed up, right? And you end up being so close. But that's different than locking out the elbow. Make sense?
Well, I don't understand the difference between locked out and fully extended.
So
if that's a fine point you don't want to handle, I mean, if you don't want to talk about it, that's fine.
But you know, it is a really full, it's a technical question but you're going to have students that are going to ask it. So it's good to have the answer. So fully extended, you almost have to feel it for yourself, right? So you can fully extend your arm and have it still be loose, right? So fully locked out means that there's so much pressure here that you're in damage of hyperextending it at this point, right? Full extension, still loose, right? So I'm fully extended here, but I can still wiggle it back and forth. Whereas if I lock it out, you see how stiff that is? You see all these muscles that are now engaging? So we don't want to engage all of those muscles, right? and lock it out through the elbow, right? You want to keep the elbow loose, if that makes sense. That's about as close as I'm going to be able to get on that one.
Thank you.
Somebody else had a question?
All right, anyone else? Oh yeah, I'm gonna unmute Matthew. Thank you. Go ahead. Thank you so
Sorry.
much.
Thank you. Can you say a few words about jamming wrists with palm heel strikes?
Yes, and I was going to go with that as well. There are people who complain of pain, students who complain of pain when they're doing a palm heel strike. It does happen. That happens far more often, in my experience, than hyperextending the elbow. If you have students that are complaining of that pain, you never want students to work through pain, right? There's no pain, no gain does not belong in self-defense, and we don't want them to hurt themselves while they're training in your classes or when they're practicing this for real. That's one of the reasons why we'd use a palm heel strike, is because with years of training, yes, can I blow my fist through a board? Sure, with years of training, but normal people can't do that without that training and that building up of the bones and the scar tissue that you need for that kind of stuff. Really hard to hurt yourself with a palm heel. But some people have wrists that are vulnerable, and so what we do instead is we teach the side fist, which is what I'm going to do next. So I'll come to that. Good question.
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, let's move into the side fist. So this is often called a hammer fist. In Taekwondo, we call this a side fist, right? So this is your fore fist, the front of your fist. This is the side of your fist, right? This is your under fist. We have all those in Taekwondo, under fist. Side fist strike is also, it's strike from a hinged joint. So it's not as effective or powerful as a palm heel strike, which is why we want most people, if they can, to do a palm heel strike. It has some very good uses, a side fist, and it's also a part that's really hard to hurt yourself, even if you're not fully trained, if you haven't built up that scar tissue. It is a useful machine. It's just a little more difficult to get the right angle and the right trajectory, and here's why. So we've got a hinge joint, right? Hinge joints only move this direction, right? One direction. They don't rotate around, just one direction. And whenever you're attacking with a hinge joint, your hand here is always going through an arc, right? You can see that. So the danger, the reason why it's a more difficult strategy, difficult to get the effect that you want, is because there's a danger that when you do a hinge joint on an arc, that you'll pass through the target, right? Instead of landing at the target. And it diminishes the power because of that, right? So if you end up doing this, right, passing through, that happens all the time. Targets for the side fist, nose primarily, right? Collarbone is the other one. Those are the two big targets. Are there other targets? Yes. They have different trajectories, and I'm trying to concentrate on straight line trajectories for today. So coming down, moving in as much as we can, right? So we're going to try to have our students not do that, but to come down on the nose, not on the top of the head, right? So big bony area, we don't want to be hitting that with any part of our body ever, despite some martial artists telling you that you can. We don't want to do that in self-defense ever, right? It's too hard. It's going to hurt us more than it's going to hurt them. So down on the nose, and to try and get this happening so that they're not coming through like that, if that makes sense. So that's the side fist. Some people, it's just their go-to. They'll have to do it because they've got wrists that have issues. And like I said, we never, ever, ever want our students to be working through pain. Ever. Injury's bad. Any thoughts on the side fist? It's pretty simple technique. One of the reasons why we teach these techniques is because it's simple, right? We can teach people to stand in their stance, side fist, right? Side fist, down on the nose, right? Can you do this with the front hand? Yes, you can. You're going to get more power for the backhand. So I almost always teach it from the backhand. If a student decides that they want to do it with the front hand and they do that in a real life situation, sure, great, right? You don't have to be perfect in order for these techniques to be effective. Typically, you'll get more power from the backhand. All right, next one that I want to work with is the knee. So if you're teaching an introductory class or even a short class, which techniques are you going to teach first? For me, it's going to be stance, palms, knees. Those are my first three techniques. If I only get three, those are the ones that I'm going to go for. And then we can start adding other ones if we want to. So knee strike. Again, straight line strike, right? I don't want to be coming from here. I want to be coming from here. I can see my target. My target is in a straight line. It's really easy with the back leg to shift your weight forward. And then when you're shifting your weight forward, you're moving your mass into the your opponent, your attacker. So it's easy to get that body, that mass into them. With a knee strike, there's two different ways you can think about a knee strike. One is forward, right? So your knee is not coming up so much as it's traveling in a straight line forward. The second way is a knee coming up, right? Like this. We have both of those in Taekwondo. You can use both of those, depends on where your target is, right? So if you're here and your target is groin height, you're gonna want to come forward, right? If you're here, target is somebody's head, so they're maybe bending down like this, you want to go more up. Both of those are perfectly legitimate as long as you're aiming for the right target. Targets for knees: groin, solar plexus, face, right? Especially if somebody's bending over or they're in a position on the ground and you're standing where you can reach them easily with that technique. Again, if we try, if we can, to teach our students to use their whole bodies with this, sometimes it takes a little bit of practice. So if we're in our normal stance, right? And we come up, I don't want to just push with my knee. I want to push with my hip and drive forward, right? Drive. Now, you can drive forward even if you're going to step back. So you see, every time I do this technique, I am bringing my knee up. I am driving forward, right? Using my hips, everything that direction, straight line, everything's going the same direction, but I'm still going to bring my foot back. That's the way I prefer this technique. That's the technique that works well with my body. And I like it because I like doing multiple techniques. So in all likelihood, I am going to be doing more than one knee strike. If I'm in a situation that is so bad that I have to hit people, I'm not going to hit once in all likelihood. I'm going to do multiple strikes until the person is no longer a danger to me and I can escape. The other way of doing one of the things I often add to the knee strike is a grab, right? So whatever body part presents itself, could be head, could be shoulders, could be an arm. And what I'm going to do with my knee is I'm not just going to hit them with my knee, right? I'm not going to just do this. I'm going to take whatever body part I now control for the few brief moments that I have it, and I'm going to pull that body part into me. So I'm going to forcefully bring that body part. So we're going to double the impact power by doing that. I never ever teach to try to control assailants. You don't want to grab them and try and hold on to them, especially if they're bigger and stronger than you, which they most often are. But momentary control can be a really good thing. And because we've got our hands here anyways, grabbing and pulling, right? So I'm going to take body part, head, shoulders usually, and I'm going to bring it in with as much speed and power as I'm hitting that knee, right? Then I let them go, right? Or I might keep that body part and do it a couple of times. Situational, depends also on what works for your body. That works really well for my body. I have trained it hard and I'm really comfortable with it. So do what's comfortable for you. Other people teach and step through, right? Also a great technique as far as I'm concerned, especially if you are somebody who is more comfortable moving in, right? Not everybody is. Or if you're somebody who's comfortable moving your body in that way. I am a fairly small person, don't weigh very much. It's really, really psychologically uncomfortable for me to step into somebody who's much bigger than I am, right? That may not happen with your students. Your students might feel perfectly comfortable doing that, and that's great. Move into them, because then you've got your whole weight that's going into that technique. You're taking their space, right? Which psychologically is bad for them, good for you if you're comfortable with it. So you can do that as a technique as well. Questions, thoughts about knees? I'm going to quickly look at my, yeah. Questions, thoughts about knees? Hi, Zoe. No, knees make sense to everybody?
We're getting a thumbs up from everyone, so I think
Yay!
we're good.
Phew, phew, we'll take that. Okay, now we get to the complicated one. The complicated one is elbows. And the reason why elbows are complicated is because while we're teaching, we say elbows. We're gonna teach an elbow strike. We're gonna do elbow strikes. There are a lot of different elbow strikes. They have different movements, different trajectories, slightly different body positioning. So it's really useful to talk about different elbow strikes whenever you're using that terminology. So if you're teaching an elbow strike, don't just call it an elbow strike. Call it a front elbow strike. Call it a rising elbow strike. Call it a high elbow strike. This is what we call them in Taekwondo. Call them a back elbow thrust in Taekwondo. Elbow, elbow. So notice two different elbows there, right? So you're going back, three actually for the back. One is straight through like this. One is straight through like this, and one is rotational like this. All of those can be effective, right, in different situations depending on where they are. So let's start with the straight line elbow strikes, because we're doing straight line stuff today rather than rotational stuff. Straight line. Straight line elbow strike number one is a front strike, right? So that is where the power of the technique of the elbow is coming forward, straight line into the target. Most often is done with a step through, right? So you're stepping into your target, sliding a little bit. So if you can see my feet, I'm not necessarily going to take a step, right? Sliding in, a little bit more of a slide in, right? So the targets for that depend on positioning, the height of the target, and how tall you are. Most of the time it's going to be solar plexus. So is this a finishing move? No, it's not a finishing move. It's not a technique that is going to end a really concerted, committed attack. But it might give you some space, especially if they're grabbing you from the front or pushing you from the front. That might be a good opportunity there. It takes a little bit of practice to get this to work, and it takes a little bit of practice to get everybody to hold the pads right. So elbow techniques, especially this one, are extras, right? I wouldn't necessarily teach any elbow strikes at all in a short course or an introductory course, depending on the students and how capable they are. Because it does take some practice to do it. And holding is really, really more interesting for this, because you've got to get the students to understand where they need to hold the pads. If you have your students hold pads, not everybody does. I do. I don't live in the US, so sometimes lawsuits are a little less concerning for me than it may be in the US, so you may not have, it may be you holding. So if you're holding, make sure that you understand the techniques, right? So if you're doing a straight line technique, you can be full facing to your target, right? Or your assailant in this case, and you're going to step in and strike. So the trajectory of the strike is here with a push in, right? Straight in. And you're going to be hitting with this section here, not with the point, right? So you're not pointing. That's a different technique. So many elbow techniques. That's why elbows are confusing, right? So straight in like that. Questions about the elbow, the straight in elbow like that? Thoughts? Okay. Next one, in terms of straight line techniques where you're facing your assailant, rising elbow. So this is coming up under the chin, right? And you can see already how challenging these techniques are when you're filming, when you're teaching, that you can miss, right? Depends on the how you target. So a rising elbow, chin, straight up this way. Doesn't matter what you do with your hands. You can have them closed in a fist. You can leave them open. I tend to leave them open most of the time because they're already here. That's what we're already doing. And there's our rising elbow. Other straight line techniques for elbows, if somebody's behind you, right? So this is typically ribs, that sort of thing. You're not going to use this technique except to get space, right? You're going to be hitting in the ribs. It's going to hurt. It's probably not going to put them in a position where they're no longer a threat and you can escape. But if they're grabbing you from behind and you need some space so that you can move into a better position for whatever technique you want to do next that is much more likely to stop the attack, like a palm heel strike, then this is a really good elbow, right? There are other elbows, and there are elbows that I love to teach. I think I'm going to leave them for now because with my eye on people who are not martial artists and sticking with the basic bread and butter techniques, I think those elbows are more than enough, right? This one, this one, this one. They're enough to practice getting you the space that you need. So other thing about elbows that is really important, they're for close, when somebody is really close to you, right? You can't use an elbow if somebody is a palm heel distance away, right? So if we're standing this distance apart, I want to use the tool that's going to get me there. I can't use an elbow from here, right? So students often, it seems weird for martial artists who have practiced, but students will often try to do an elbow when the distance is too far, right? So you're going to have to walk them through that. And it's as simple as doing this demonstration, right? So here I am, I can hit you from here. Now I can't hit you, I'm too far away. Does that make sense? Thoughts on elbows? Questions about elbows?
All right, so we have a question from Carrie. You can go ahead, you're unmuted.
Hi, Carrie.
I would be surprised if I could get enough power to strike with my elbow into somebody's solar plexus.
You are afraid of not having enough power to do that?
It just seems like that wouldn't be strong enough to have an impact.
Yeah, so couple things. Elbows are really powerful. And I wonder if that is a psychological thinking as opposed to what would actually happen if you tried. So
Yeah.
that's number one, right? Because elbows are really powerful. It's hard. The reason why we use elbows, same as palms, it's really hard to hurt yourself when you're striking with an elbow, right? Remember, you're also, with that particular strike into the solar plexus, you're moving your body forward as well. So you've got your whole body mass that's coming in. It's not just doing the elbow, right? So if you're here and you just do this, I agree with you. Really hard to get power that way. You're doing this, right? Whole body's moving in for that particular strike, straight line strike. You're going to move in with your body, if that makes sense. Helpful, better? Oh, also, solar plexus, relatively vulnerable, but also remember what you're trying to do here. So with the solar plexus, you're trying to create a little bit of a can't breathe moment to open yourself up for more effective techniques for ending the fight, right? So let's talk about that a little bit. Part of the reason why we use the physical techniques that we do is because they don't hurt us and are really likely to hurt our assailant, right? In a way that's going to damage him enough. And I use the term him. Many of them are men, but obviously we all know that women are also assailants. You're going to do something that is enough to stop the attack, debilitate him enough. But not all the techniques that we do are going to have that effect. And even the ones that we really want to have that effect, they may not the first time. You may have to do it more than once, right? There is a need though for, if you can't get into the position where you can do a palm, say, or a knee to the groin or to the solar plexus or to the face, there's a need for sometimes space-making techniques. Someone's grabbed you, right? And you just need a little bit of space, right? There's all kinds of different techniques that we use. But typically if we're at a situation where we're going to, where we have to hit somebody, it's already bad, we really want to use those techniques first. Does that help? Anybody else?
Does anyone else have any questions? If you want to raise your hand virtually or send a message, we'll unmute you. Okay, I think we're good.
Okay, so there are a bunch of other techniques that we could add if we're doing longer courses that are strikes. Arcan to the throat is one that I really like. It depends on what you're teaching, right? And so we can talk about different kinds of strikes if you want to do that on another day. All right, so closing notes, and then if there's any more questions, you guys can let me know. For those of you who are new instructors, we're not martial artists. Thank you for being here. The physical techniques are just a small portion of what we do. Don't worry about losing your physical techniques. Your students won't lose them. Once you teach them, they will not lose them. They will have those with them forever because they're nice, easy techniques. And you guys do too. So your physical techniques will probably not deteriorate. They're easy techniques. There's only a handful of techniques and you only have to be an expert in those couple of techniques. It will take practice as you're learning to be an instructor as to how to get the right language, right? And to say what you need to say. Even me, I've been instructing for 18 years and I'm struggling with this platform and I don't feel like, I'm feeling like it's a challenge for me, right? So you're gonna feel the same way when you're instructing the first time. You're gonna say to yourself, you're gonna go afterwards, oh, it's like, oh, I totally forgot to tell them that about the elbow strike, or I totally forgot that about the palm strike. And it's fine, it's okay. You will develop your rhythm. You will develop the things that you need to learn by checking in with us, checking in with your mentors, by practicing, by having students ask you questions. And the beautiful thing about ESD Global is that we all have each other to lean on, and you've got somebody to call when you do have these questions. It takes practice to teach, and it's a difficult skill, and it's not the same skill as learning or practicing a martial art or anything like that. So I hope that you have picked up a few things that maybe you didn't know before, or a little bit of a language or to your students that you could use, a different way of thinking about things, a way of simplifying things so you don't have to make it all that complicated for yourself or for your students. And yeah, there's layers and layers and layers to martial arts. There's reasons why we train martial arts for 5 years or 10 years or 20 years or 50 years, because we do have all those layers. ESD is simple. All the physical techniques are simple. And you guys got this. You guys can do this. Okay? If you have any questions, hit me up now. Ooh, favorite kick to teach? In a beginning course for ESD? The knee for me. I mean, I'm Taekwondo. I love kicks. You know, flying, dodging, reverse, spinning, turning kick, yeah. But for ESD, it's a nice knee to the groin.
If anyone else has any questions or comments, feel free to raise your hands and we'll have you unmuted. We'd like to hear your feedback.
Sometimes students get tangled up while turning around. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And typically, when I do the grabs and strangulations, because I teach high school girls most of the time, what their favorite thing to do is this. When they're doing the release, and I'll show you guys all this, they do this. And I'm always constantly saying to them, guys, it's not ballet. We're not doing ballet. No pirouettes here. So the tangling up when they turn around, the trick with students is to remind them to step. Because often they do this, right? And what they need to do instead is take a step out, right? Step, right? Do the hokey pokey and turn yourself around. It's like they forget that they can pick up their feet. Yeah, totally. It's so true. And that's something else that's really important about when you're teaching students who are not used to using their bodies, right? What happens to our bodies when we are learning something new is we get so tangled up with one body part that we forget how the other body parts work, right? And you got to remind them, you shake it out of them and sort of say, okay, so that was awesome. Cool, you did everything right up here. Fantastic. But don't forget to step when you turn, and they'll get it eventually. But it comes up all the time in classes. Anybody else? Thoughts, questions about striking? Okay, so next question then, if you have nothing else about sort of the basic striking, what else do you guys want reminders on for physical techniques? What physical techniques do you want to know about? What do you feel that you need to have the right language for when you're teaching? What are you confused about? What don't you remember from your level 1? Yeah, warm-up drills. Yeah.
Zoe's saying that the choke release, grab release.
Yeah, so we want a hair grab release. We want a strangulation release. Yeah, yeah, those ones are more complicated than just the strikes. The reason why I wanted to do the stance and the strikes first is that I figured if we're going to do a series that we would cover everything. But yes, but I know those are more complicated techniques. So if you're in particular if I'm hearing a lot of people say that they're having difficulty remembering, say, for example, the strangulation release, then I think it's a good idea for us at ESD Global to start thinking about why that technique everybody's struggling with, and maybe start coming up with a way of making it easier to teach, or finding a slightly different technique, or doing something else so that it's not hard to remember, because we don't want our students to find this hard to remember either, right? We want our students to be able to remember this 10 years from now if they're being strangled, right? Because not everybody's going to come back and do your class over and over and over again, right? This needs to be a long-term thing for them. So if you guys are struggling to remember it, right, then they might as well. Although again, I'm gonna suggest that it's harder to teach this than it is to learn it. So the parts that you might be forgetting might be your instruction rather than the actual technique. You might just need a refresher on how to instruct it, right? I missed that last one. Thanks for coming, Carrie. It's good to see you. All right.
Okay, we have 5 more minutes. If anyone has more questions, please go ahead.
Or comments. Throw the comments at me too. I know several of you are martial artists, so if you have anything that you wanted to add, do you have a technique that you use that for striking that I didn't demonstrate? Other than elbows, which I deliberately chose not to, in your short courses? Not really, no. Yeah, see, I think these really are the bread and butter of our ESD, right? Palm heel strike, side fist, if you can't do a palm heel, knees, right? Hit the face, hit the groin, hit the face, hit the groin. If you can't get either of those, you know, maybe go for a secondary target if you need space, especially, right? Kick to the knees. Yeah, that would be up there for sure on my list as well. Do you teach that in your short course, Kim? Yes.
Kim, I'm gonna unmute you. You can go ahead.
Yeah.
Wait.
There we
You're
go.
unmuted. Go ahead.
Hi, Sheila. I've been watching you all along. It's been great. You know, if I have time in the short course, I'm similar to you. I will always go for the most basic stuff first. And if I have time in a 2-hour course, I may not get to a knee kick to the knees, but I do like it. And it almost seems like it's not even, it's almost like a stomp to the knee, I guess, is how I would classify it. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I like doing it too. And I will often teach it again if I have time. Sometimes I do, because the high school girls, they want to move, right? So the way I teach it is, I think a stomp is a better way of putting it. I teach it as a side technique, typically, right? So the person is kind of off to your side, or you're going to move into that position. And I teach it as a straightening of the hip and a straightening of the knee at the same time, really explosively, right? So they're gonna come up into their position. And you know, in martial arts, we're really picky about how you raise your knee and what the angles are and all that kind of thing. With self-defense, I'm less so, right? And they're gonna use the flat of their foot, right? Yes, you're gonna use your foot sword if you can, but if you just tell them the back of the heel, the flat of the foot, that's close enough for a self-defense technique. And then I say you're gonna really explosively, all at the same time, uncoil your hip and uncoil your knee. And you're gonna straighten your body, so you're using your hips and your body and your core as well, right? And just slam it down. And it feels very much like a stomp, right? It's the same action as a stomp. You're just taking it off to the side a little bit. That's the way I would teach it. Make sense?
We had a question from Matthew. You're unmuted. You can go ahead.
Thank you. The stomping to the knee is a phenomenal technique. I love it. My question is, are you teaching it with a suited instructor? And if so,
No.
how are you keeping their knee safe? Thank you.
Right. So I do not teach with a suited instructor. Not that I'm opposed to that idea. I would love to do it. I do enjoy training with my training partners in Taekwondo and with self-defense sometimes as well. But in class, I don't have a suited instructor. So we just teach that in the air. We don't even bother. We don't bother to do it with partners. We don't do it with equipment. We don't do it with pads or anything. We're literally just standing there and going, that. It's the only safe way to do it. There's no, even if I don't think that there is a safe way of teaching that, even with pads, right? Because the whole point, I mean, it's a devastating technique, right? Absolutely devastating. Even if you're not trained and you don't do it perfectly and you don't have everything right, it's a stomp to a really vulnerable hinge that only flexes in one direction. So if you're getting it on any angle that is not the direction that it wants to move, and if your attacker can't chase you, great, fantastic, job done, get out of there.
All right, so we have the last question from Brittany. We're close to 1 p.m. So her question is it possible to do the warm-up drills or games when it's virtual?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think so. Maybe not everything. Warm-up drills are, Warm-up drills are like martial arts, and I have been a personal trainer. I know all kinds of different warm-up stuff. The main point of doing a warm-up is just to get some heart rate up a little bit and the blood flowing a little bit and get your muscles a little bit warm. So don't overthink the warm-up. If you're a new instructor who's teaching these kind of things for the first time, don't overcomplicate it, right? You can do some really, really, really simple basic warm-up moves, right? So some really simple ones, side to side, right? And we can do side to side while we're dancing. We can do side to side like this, right? We can do hamstrings, right? Just kick yourself in the bum, right? We can do high knees, right? We can do little baby squats with big arm motions, right? All of that can be done. We can do some of this, right? Warm up should be fast, blitzy, dynamic movements, right? So they shouldn't be stretches. Don't do stretches for warm up ever, 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 ever. And yeah, so don't overthink the warm ups. Do something fast. People aren't there to learn warm ups either, right? They want to learn techniques, and you can use the techniques to do the warm up, right?
That's true. Okay, Sheila, I want to thank you so much for this webinar, and everyone, I know that there's a lot that we still want to cover, so please send us your questions on the Facebook group, and let us know what you're interested in learning more about, because Sheila will be giving another webinar about physical skills, and you'll be receiving an email and of course a Facebook invite. So thank you.
Regulations.
Yes, thank you so much, and we will see you next week. All right, take care.
Thanks, guys. Hopefully I'll see you all next week.